You're listening to Binjang 91.5. And now it's time for Tech Talk with Mathew Dickerson. G'day, Matthew.
Good afternoon, Tony. I'm a bit more awake now after I've had a bit of a sleep this afternoon, after getting up very early this morning to watch that Apple Worldwide Developer Conference. So ready to talk tech again.
I'm really pleased for you and the listeners, Matthew. That's really good.
I can hear the excitement in your voice, Tony.
Oh, absolutely, yes. It's not just information overload, it's what we can expect for the next 5 minutes, isn't it?
That's right.
Not really. Anyway, when we want to visit the International Space Station, who is going to take us there in the future, Matthew?
It's an interesting question. I know your listeners have been pondering this for weeks and months, thinking, how am I going to get to the International Space Station? Well, interestingly enough, Virgin Galactic have just inked a deal with NASA for private trips up to the International Space Station. And effectively, I know it sounds crazy, but they're going to act as a travel agency for trips to the space station. Now, there's obviously a fair bit to go for people to be able to get to that point, for Virgin Galactic to be able to fly them there. And I imagine it's not for everyone. I imagine that people might come along and apply and might pay the exorbitant sums they'll be asking. Obviously, we don't know those amounts yet. But I imagine there'd be some little fitness processes you would need to go through before they actually even allow you to go there, because there's some people up there doing some serious research. They probably don't want anyone just coming along there and maybe not being fit for purpose as such. So there's a few processes there. But anyway, it's a good start that Virgin Galactic have signed that deal, and they'll be able to start taking people up there sometime in the near-ish future.
Yeah, and I'm sure Elon Musk will be looking very closely at that. I think he might have a few ideas about that too, but anyway.
Yeah, that's right. With SpaceX, obviously, there's some plans to do that. They've already sent a fair few rockets up, and they've got a fair bit of a head start on Virgin Galactic, but Virgin Galactic obviously are in there as well. Again, competition. We'll wait and see what happens, but that's always good.
Yes. Now, our next topic is quite interesting because wastewater testing, like sewage, they've been using that to monitor drug use throughout the country at various sewage plants to determine the level of drug usage and crime centres, that sort of thing, in the recent times. I'm wondering if they've done that locally. But they're using this now to tell us about the COVID-19 virus, and that's a pretty good idea, isn't it?
It is. The CSIRO is actually backing this wastewater testing. They've been doing some testing in Australian suburbs at the moment just to see if they can get a cheap and an easy way for health authorities to start to pin down some localised outbreaks of coronavirus. And I think it even goes a step further than that. You wouldn't even need to be treating it at, for example, the sewage treatment plant. You've obviously got a lot of pump stations along the way that actually take that sewage from different areas and then get that through to the sewage treatment plant. So to me, it'd be a fairly simple process once you can test the sewage to see whether or not there's actually any coronavirus there. You can actually just break it down to very small sections of a community. And once you can break it down to there, you can quarantine those areas off. And that's exactly what the CSIRO is talking about, being able to let people go about their normal day. Sometimes the symptoms won't show up until you've already had the virus for a period of time, but it will show up in sewage rather quickly. So that can be a way of basically quarantining those suburbs, really making sure you can lock down those areas before people even show any symptoms. So it is a great case of CSIRO, again, coming to the forefront in our scientific needs in Australia. So I'm a big fan of what CSIRO has done and is continuing to do, but also a good example of some Aussie ingenuity and looking at different ways of approaching this worldwide problem.
Yeah. Now, Matthew, this is another very topical thing, and that is cyber fraud. And we've seen what's been going on with various institutions being the subject of that. But it's also very more localised too, of course. And I know that a lot of people are pointing the finger at North Korea about cyber fraud. But the interesting thing is, what kind of experiences are people on the ground having with cyber fraud?
Yeah, there's a report that was done recently which surveyed a huge number of people, and they found that 1 in 5 had experienced cyber fraud last year. So this is in the 2019 year. So that's pretty scary when you think 20% of people are experiencing that cyber fraud. And there's a whole range of different ways that they're experiencing it. So they might have had, for example, their device infected by a virus. Now, people don't write viruses because they're trying to do something nice for you. They write viruses because they're trying to do something. So it is a form of cyber fraud when some people don't always identify it as that. You've had people access online accounts for fraudulent purposes, having bank account details stolen or cards stolen. So they're the more common things that you see happen. But you also see scam emails. So 4.5% of the internet users said they've been a victim of a scam email. And they're pretty easy to fall for because the scammers are very clever at making that email look just like the real email. And of course, they see it come through. It might be a bill payment. It might be following up something. And people click on the link there thinking that it's legitimate. And of course, in many cases, it's not. So there's a huge number of those there. But the thing that this survey brought out, I think, is that the data showed here was a lot higher than the authorities had because most people don't report any of these incidents to police. When someone has some money stolen or a virus infection, then they're not running straight to the police to report it unless there's a large sum of money stolen. So the authorities have figures that are much lower than this survey showed, mainly because of that lack of reporting. So again, I suppose, as I've said before, in terms of the cyber attacks that Australia is under at the moment, just making sure you've got a few simple things in place, really applying the blowtorch of common sense to things that happen and just being a little bit sceptical about things that happen. I think they're really important things to just be mindful of.
Yeah, and it extends also to scam phone calls too, doesn't it?
Exactly right, yeah. And they are frustrating and annoying, and sometimes the ones that are really clever at it put people under pressure where they probably make decisions that they wouldn't normally make because they feel like they must make a decision quickly to solve some problem or to fix something or to make sure they're not in trouble. And Aussies are actually pretty law-abiding citizens. We don't like being in trouble. So when someone rings and says they're from the tax office and they've got an overdue tax payment, they're very quick to want to be able to fix that up because they don't want to have the tax office onto them or a bill payment. Many people are very focused on making sure they don't have overdue bill payments, for example. So again, I think people take advantage of that, the fact that we are generally law-abiding citizens.
Yeah, that's for sure. And you've been listening to Tech Talk with Mathew Dickerson on Binjang 91.5. Stay tuned next week for the morning and afternoon sessions. And in the meantime, it's back to the great music and community information on Binjang.
Thanks, Tony. See you next week.
Thanks, Matthew.